Hey everybody, this is Lisa Nehring from True North Homeschool Academy, and I'm here with Jan McGrath. This is Life Skills 101, Life Skills for Digital Age. And Jan is here to talk today about developing writers for today's world. And I'm super excited for you to hear from her. When we have been doing co-ops and class days, I always ask the parents, like, what do you need the most help with? And inevitably it's English. It's our number one best-selling subject area at True North Homeschool Academy. And I think a lot of parents are really worried about teaching English because it feels like communication is so important, obviously. But it feels like a subjective subject matter. So you're here to shed light on that and give parents really simple tools about how to uncomplicate this very important subject. So I'm super glad you're here, Jan. Tell us about yourself before we get started. Where are you from? How many kids do you have? All the things.
Well, I'm on the other side of South Dakota and I'm in the Black Hills. I have two boys. They're almost 13 and 16. And I've homeschooled for now 12 years. And I've tried a lot of curriculum. And to arrive to this place about writing was a lot of trial and error. But I will tell you, you and I have a common friend, the Fortes of Excellence in Education, and she had helped me realize how simple it should be and could be.
Yeah, I love it. So if you guys are looking for some great resources for homeschooling, Martin and Carolyn Forte, Excellence in Education in Monrovia, California, you can find the link in our bio, or in our show notes. So make sure you check the show notes. So where have you gotten to with how to teach writing?
Well, simply, it was just the essential thing that many of our past authors, from C.S. Lewis to Beatrix Potter to Alexander Hamilton, who authored The Federalist, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, they all read amply and widely.
Yeah.
And that is the key. And in order for us to read, we need to be present and in that place to read the classic books that have been timeless. That's the key.
Yeah, I love it. We are always advocating for reading, reading, reading. And there's a different thing that happens in your brain when you read off of a page versus reading off of a screen. And even reading off of a phone or a computer, your brain actually processes differently than when you're reading off of a page in a book. Just like it's different to type than it is to write with a pen, and it's different to do cursive than it is print. All of these are different neurological processes in the brain. So when you say reading, are you saying any kind of reading goes? What do you mean by reading?
I mean the books that have held the test of time. So I'm talking the authors, as I just said, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, Austen, Copperfield, and if literature from pre-1950s that have embedded the Judeo-Christian values that we so love. Modern books have thrown out the Christian base. And so that the character and the morality that comes from a Christian base, a Judeo-Christian base, is less apparent. So we know the titles. We know Little House on the Prairie. We know the Narnia series, the Tolkien series. That's what I'm talking about. And those books in of itself, if all that you were bathing yourself night and day, and of course, I should start with the Bible, a great literary work, and of course, the cornerstone of the Word. And so I think if all that you did night and day was read and had the habit of journaling, you are set to go.
So what about, journaling? That seems really simple.
Yes.
You were mentioning a story about Alexander Hamilton and how many books he owned.
So he was from the West Indies. He was parented by a single mom, and they only had 39 books in his bookshelf. Chernow wrote the book Hamilton, and for which the Broadway play musical came from. And this pauper read incessantly, and books were expensive. And so what books he collected, he treasured and reread. And that's another telling fact of a book, is that it is as good as it was when you were reading it 5 years ago to 10 years later. You will come back to it. And so he authored the Federalist Papers, for which with John Jay and another author, but he was our US treasurer. And it was his writing, in fact, that brought him to the United States from the West Indies.
Mhm.
So I think it's very important for us to take the time to tactily hold a book and read it. And like you said, neurologically, it's a very different experience than reading off a tablet or off a screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have actually, you're an author yourself. You have a couple of booklets, Tell Me Your Story and Tell Me a Story Again. Tell us about those and how those came about and how and why. Why did you even write them?
Well, Tell Me a Story is an adaptation from a previous booklet called From Heart to Page, authored by Michelle Van Loon. And by her express permission, I adapted it for today's new generation of home educators. And why I created it was largely because that it was how I had my children write. I would ask them, tell me a story. My 4-year-old was looking out the window. He saw the cars going by, and I would say, tell me what you see. And as he spoke, he dictated, I wrote. And you can imagine for a 4-year-old, when they saw the printed word, as you said, that physical expression of his thoughts on paper, that transformed everything, because he saw that his thoughts had meaning and had bearing. And so it was from that I started creating prompts, and that developed into Tell Me a Story Again, the second booklet. And those journal prompts are the most simple way of creating the habit of writing without a curriculum or telling the person what they should do or not do. Because if you're reading well night and day, you've got that balance of learning the languages of authors, mind to mind, speaking into your child's mind, and then they writing and learning that language of writing well.
I think that's, I mean, when I reflect back on Lewis and Tolkien, I think some of the reasons that they're so beloved and we retell their stories in so many different ways is because they understood language. They were polyglots. They understood multiple languages. And they understood, when you understand a language, you understand a culture. And so they really had an understanding of so many cultures, and that breadth comes to bear in their writing, which is part of why their writing is so intriguing and powerful. Is it's not just one perspective. It's a multi-layered perspective. That's what part of what makes it so beautiful, I think, too. Yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting that you said the word language, because the language of the way we speak currently is a reflection of our culture. In fact, Francis Schaeffer talks about that in modern culture. Our language has, and you see it in poetry, and you see it in music and lyrics, the fragmentation of our language is a indication that we have become less of we've lost some of that reading culture that was so present pre-screens, pre-television.
Yeah. So, and I think too, just like when we text, it's so easy to put you instead of you, we just get into that fragmented, like, how fast can I do this, or autocorrect, which is not really corrective many times. We'll just, shorten it or whatever. So in order to write well, we need to read well, which leads to thinking well.
Right. Yes. So William Zinsser talks about that in his book on writing well. I don't know if this comes off correct on your side.
Yeah, it does.
He said that clutter is the disease of American writing. We are a society strangling in unnecessary words, circular constructions, pompous frills, and meaningless jargon. And what you were talking about earlier about texting or emoji, it's that meaningless jargon. And that's what is happening. And in order to write well, he speaks about thinking clearly. And how do we think clearly? We need that place of silence of the mind and that stillness that we so long ago had in an agrarian culture. And it is now harder because we are distracted. I think there's an expression called distracted from distraction by distraction.
Oh, wow. I haven't heard that before. That's a lot. Distracted from distraction by distraction. True.
Yeah,
True.
That was quoted from the book called The Shallows. Nicholas Carr talks about the age that we're in efficiency of information exchange. That is the commerce and that we're in when we hit that www link, whatever that may be. It's the information exchange, that efficiency.
Yeah.
And so it's Google is in the business of AdWords, in which people are searchable by that. So the language is not even, we don't even need to develop our full thought. All we need to do is put in, a few words on our Google search and we're good to go.
And in fact, you're going to get a more effective search if you don't use article adjectives and connective words. So if you don't make a complete sentence, you're going to get a better search result than if you do make a complete sentence, just because of the algorithm and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about writing, I always come back to, as you say, the language. Our ability to communicate has in some ways been reduced by this efficiency of exchange through text, obviously. And sometimes, we don't even write out our words. We just use BTW, by the way, So
right.
The world has arrived at an age of cheap, complex devices of great reliability. This was written an article from 1945, Vannevar Bush, As We May Think. And he was FDR's science advisor during World War II. And he's talking about something in 1945.
Wow.
So we have become a less literate world. There was a time when the expression Barkus is willing, Copperfield's the book titles David Copperfield by Dickens, everyone knew what Theodore Roosevelt meant when people when asked, is he going to run for presidency? Theodore Roosevelt responded to say, Bacchus is willing. Why did he say that? Because it was everyone from seafaring individuals, from the lowest of low to the highest of society, understood that because they were a literate culture. If we speak today, we're not asking each other, what book are you reading? That was a common expression in the 17th, 18th century. Today, we may say, what did you watch? What movie did you catch this weekend? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So reading leads to thinking well. I would have to agree with you. And you mentioned too, just giving yourself space to think. I think that's one of the things. I'm a muller. If I have big decisions, I need to mull it through. Like making hasty decisions when they're big or expensive really stresses me out. If I can just sleep on it or take a walk or just read a book or just have a chance to let my brain rest about it, I always come to a good, clean decision. But if I'm pushed and forced, I don't trust my decision. And I think a lot of us are that way more than we realize, that we just need space to not have input coming at us all the time, where we can just mull and think and rest and let our thoughts kind of sort themselves out. But reading, having a plethora of good words in our brains, having those good scenes of stories. I mean, that's the classics are when we can all refer to in our home. We have some people who can memorize really well, and we'll just refer to a story that we've all known and loved, like Pride and Prejudice or Narnia, and we all immediately know what we're talking about because it's something we hold in common. Are those stories, which are so important. So reading well leads to thinking well. And do we automatically get to writing well?
Well, in order for us to get to that place, I would like to just kind of mention something about the realm of media. It is the issue of our age. And there is a book by a man who authored a book called Glow Kids. You mentioned that you were familiar with that title. And he is a neuroscientist, and he speaks about Nicholas Cardaris, who authored the book. He was a professor of neuroscience, and he specialized in addiction. So when we talk about addiction, we probably are thinking of chemical addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction. But he is actually now, since in 2008, 2007 and onward, has been dealing with digital drugs.
Yeah.
digital drugs, as he calls it, or the electronic babysitter. And the digital drug addiction that he's dealing with is something that he did not expect, because Nicholas Kardaras in Glow Kids is familiar with dealing with people that are schizophrenics, arsonists, suicidal, who basically are dealing with an addiction, typically with chemical drugs.
Right.
But his world has been changed since the world of Facebook came into the world. And I'm not picking on them per se, but the advent of social media and the advent of video games. And he was talking about how he's dealing with this term, the Tetris effect, and or game transfer phenomena. And the game transfer phenomena, in place of reading, what are we doing instead of reading? Well, here we have an example. Nicholas Kardaras talks about teens from as young, actually he says teens, but he really was referring to as young as 7 years old and onward, that these game transfer phenomena, where the person is not in their presence of mind, they are not in reality. They have transferred the kind of a matrix effect. They have entered into the video game fantasy realm, and they have got themselves in addiction. And so this addiction gets them into what he calls vampire hours. They're up all night. They even they are so enthralled in this world that their brain function to be able to communicate. He has students that stammer. They actually twitch when they try to hold something. Their fine motor skills are altered. So returning to the topic of writing, if you are not able to read, what are you doing? And in most cases, in the case of Nicholas Kardaras, author of Glow Kids, he's dealing with students that are using their spare time to play video games or get on the screen. So, in order to write well, to think clearly, your brain needs to function clearly, and screens interfere with that.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was so important about Glow Kids is that he points out that there's no magic number that means your kids are addicted or that you're addicted to electronics. It's a spectrum, and it changes with each person and how our brains are wired individually and how we interact with that media and that kind of thing. So for some kids, it could be 20 minutes. For other kids, it could be hours. It just really depends on the person and their exposure and what else they're doing in life. So I guess I just want to point that out, because if you feel like your kids are interacting with you differently all of a sudden, I noticed this when I was teaching in a 1 day a week kind of homeschool classroom. I had the same group of students all day, 1 day a week. And I had them for a couple of years. And in 8th grade, all of a sudden, after Christmas, a lot of the kids were really tired. And they were distracted and they didn't get their homework done. And the common denominator of what happened is they got cell phones at Christmas. And all of a sudden they were up all night listening to music because they couldn't sleep without the music, but there was no controls. And I say this when I do public speaking, I hold up my cell phone and I say, there's more power in this cell phone than what they took up on Apollo 11. And yet we're handing these very super powerful supercomputers to our 12-year-old kids who have very undeveloped brains. Like their brains are just like undeveloped neurologically. And we're saying, here's this all powerful thing that can take a spaceship into space. And it's yours. Good luck to you. And I just think we need to be more thoughtful and careful about that, because the kids don't have the executive functioning skills to manage it as well as we assume that they do.
Well, and what you're talking about is so true, because in Glow Kids, he did take a sampling of students. And your example of Christmas vacation is excellent, because the experiment was to take novice internet users versus veteran internet users. And within a span of 1 week, the brain plasticity, the brain has changed, has been altered. And so it's true. There is a lot of power in our use of a cell phone.
Mhm.
And even I was actually not only in brain use and altering your brain's cells, but also in reading this book. The title is so funny. The
Yeah.
non-digital galactic EMFs. EMFs are electromagnetic field,
Yeah.
and he was. I think the World Health Organization finally had decided to provide that information that we so needed to know as a consumer. And they finally admitted that there is, they provided an honest evaluation and announced that the radiation from cell phones can possibly cause cancer equal to the hazards of lead exposure, engine exhaust, chloroform. So
Wow.
now here I'm showing you something that I will tell many moms not to do is don't do this. You know, we tend to put this right here, but if you read this book by Nicholas Kleinhalt, he says that the EMFs from a cell phone are so powerful. Like you said, it's such a powerful device. He advises that you keep it at least 5 millimeters away from you because the radiation from it can actually, it's like frying your brain or cooking your brain in a microwave.
Wow. Wow. That's terrifying.
It
Um,
is.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And so when you're talking about young students who are thinking of their brains to be capable of writing or anything, um, you know, this is just so ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Third world countries have this. The simple thing is to not have it right at your ear and to have it not make contact with your body.
Yeah.
He talks about he's known as the EMF guy. If you go to just emf.com or org, I forget, he talks about ways for you to minimize the brain damage and the mind brain cell alterations.
Wow. Wow. That's important stuff. And I think we should really consider it. I'm always telling my kids, don't put your cell phone on your person, like carry
Yes.
it in your
Yes.
purse, but don't have it in your pocket. I know this sounds, girls are putting it in their bra strap, you know, I mean, like, just don't carry it close to your body because there's
Yes.
been, you know, cases of cancer and it's really in the area where people are holding their cell phone close to their body. So put it externally, but that sounds like an important thing. Um, I know when I'm on the phone during our busy season in July, this is so weird, but my ear will get hot. I actually have gone to just headsets because it just really kind of freaks me out a little bit. Like,
Yes.
what's going on?
Yeah. And
This is-
I still like, I will use earphones, but I will use hollow tubes so that you don't get the EMF transferred to you. And so, and the other thing I just wanted to point out is tablets and laptops. They're even worse than desktop computers because they have double radiation. So think about where you're putting a laptop, typically on your lap.
yeah.
And we're talking about the reproductive organs.
Yeah.
He hasn't, this book doesn't go into too much research, but he does have expressed concerns about fertility by placing the laptops on your, so I don't want to digress too much about that.
I kind of went off on a rabbit trail, but an important one because I run True North Homeschool Academy. We are online. We sell online products. This is what we do. But
Sure.
I think we need to really consider that they're tools, and how are we storing our tools? How are we using our tools? It's just
Yes.
like when my grandpa, who was a farmer, he took very good care of his tools. He didn't leave his tools out in the field. He oiled them. He did regular maintenance on them. He kept them in the barn. He babied his tools, and then he made sure, like, he wasn't in the way of the discs when they were turning either, because that's a great way to lose a limb. And I think we need to realize we're in a whole different world, but our tools, we need to manage our tools. Our
Yes.
tools should not be managing us. We should
Yes.
be managing them.
And speaking of tools, in this book called The Shallows, Nicholas Carr, he was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. He didn't receive the prize itself. But in that, it's funny you were talking about tools, and he was talking about the simple fact of, let's say, Gutenberg's printing press, how that phenomenally changed the way people had access to the written word, right? And they had this common language now. there was less illiteracy, and the price of books reduced substantially. And I think what I mean by the invention of any tool or equipment, we need to recognize that technology, be it the screen, the tablet, the iPhone, cell phone, it also has impact on us. And we have to be intentional in how we outsmart that smartphone, and how we use our leisure time instead of going to the net. Our brain functions actually, in the last Child in the Woods, Louv, the author, speaks about how our brain actually is not only oxygenated by being outside, but also the fact that our eyes are seeing out and wide. And that is so healthy, again, for our brain functions to be able to think clearly.
Yeah, I love that. Seeing out and wide is so good, because if your kids are on a screen all the time, it's really affecting their eyes too. And the back of your eyes are brain matter. So your eyes are really an important function of how you perceive the world and all those kind of things.
Yes.
So it seems like maybe we've gone a little far afield. We were talking about reading, thinking well, and how all that leads into writing. But I think this all really does lead into how to teach your kids writing in a really profound way, because if they're only taking in information in a very passive way, which is what a screen is, it's very passive.
Yes.
So that affects how they're going to be able to think and write, isn't it?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. I love that you use the word passive, because that is so true. When we have the physical book in our hand and we're turning the page, sometimes we drop and have coffee stain on a book. It's like dog earing a page. You will be
right here, major coffee stain.
Yes. Your mind will remember that far more than if it was looking at it in a flat screen. But the passiveness of looking at a screen, your brain doesn't have to work as hard, right? But when it has to read a book word for word, there was a time when books had continuous text, where there was no periods, no capitalization. And you can imagine how hard the reader and the listener had to understand and picture and imagine in their minds what's going on. And that the height of your brain, how it has to reach and make those words concrete is hard work. But if done on a regular basis, especially if the story is engaging, then it's like your brain always being given filet mignon, and it will always detect a fast food book. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. Right. And I've homeschooled long enough that twaddle was a big catchword in the homeschool world for a long time. Don't let your kids read twaddle. They should only read like the highbrow books and stuff like that. And I will admit, we have the complete collection of Calvin and Hobbes, and we have like a lot of Snoopy cartoon books too. And I think it's okay to read things that aren't always like classics. Like, I don't think that you should always have to read a certain type of book. There's a lot of things that can be taken from those simple fun books too. But if you have a continual steady diet of only twaddle, it changes how your brain understands, just the importance of literacy and how you interact with the world. Because when you're reading something like C.S. Lewis or Tolkien or, any of the other greats, it just forces you to think beyond yourself. And you get to rub shoulders with great thinkers of past centuries. And that could really affect. In fact, about a month ago, one of my teachers was reading C.S. Lewis, and she sent me a quote, and she said, "Is this where you got the name True North?" And I said, "I don't know. It probably is, because I've read C.S. Lewis over and over. He's one of my spiritual mentors in life. So maybe subconsciously I did, but it's always been a prayer I've prayed for my kids, that they would go true north, looking neither to the right nor the left all of their days." And that sounds way more like C.S. Lewis than me, honestly. So, we are influenced by the people that we read, and we might not even know how it affects us and changes our life, because it becomes ingrained in who we are.
Yes, in fact, that term twaddle, as you probably know, comes from Charlotte Mason, the
Yes.
English British educator.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you said about those ideas being the feast of ideas and placing them mind to mind with the student, with your child. And as you said a moment ago about Snoopy and Calvin and Hobbes, I said, earlier, I said, read night and day. And we have Tintin, we have Richie Rich, the classic
Yeah.
old comics.
Uh-huh.
And nothing wrong with it as long as it maintains, moral character and it nothing wrong with that. But as you said, if the mainstay of their meals are mind to mind, the Elliots, the Wendell Berrys, Marguerite D'Angeli, the Delairs, and we can go on, then they only have an appetite for that. And Agatha Christie, depending on what your genre is. And one thing I will have side note is that someone I've had moms say this to me, but my son does not like to read fictional books.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I understand that typically when they take a sampling of readers, male, female, males typically want informational reading. They want reference books. And that's okay. Yeah. And to that answer, I say, then family, let's read aloud.
Yes.
Your son doesn't have to read. Your son doesn't have to read, but he certainly, if given a living book, they will say, read another chapter.
Right.
And you don't have to read it. They don't have to read it.
Right.
You can read it and that's that reading culture that I really encourage families to return to. Turn off, and unplug, and just have that time of silence. Yeah.
I love that reading culture. And if you're not reading out loud to them, get a book on tape. That certainly counts as reading.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. We just took a trip to Ohio from South Dakota, and we listened to The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis and Screwtape Letters again for like the 400th time. It never gets old. Again, it's a classic. And it's really informed a lot of how we live, but you can definitely use books on tape for sure. There's some great actors, voice actors that are doing phenomenal jobs with reading out loud. Yeah, so that's always a great way to read. The other thing too, I mean, we have 5 kids, so some of our kids, one of them in particularly, she preferred dictionaries to any kind of novel. And she was happy listening to it, but she didn't want to read a novel by herself, but she loved dictionaries and encyclopedias. So instead of buying her novels, we would get her the cetacean encyclopedia or the dog encyclopedia. And she memorized quite a lot of information. Now that counts. There's nothing wrong with that. Like if you have a kid that prefers that, feed that,
Yeah, and returning to our mutual friend, Carolyn Forte, in fact, I recall when my son was 8 or 9 years old, I said to her, he doesn't like to read literary works. And we were reading aloud. And she said, what is he reading? And I said, at the time, he was reading informationally, how to play chess and how to build a boat, and I think I referred to the American Boy's Handy book. I think and he was an informational reader. And Carolyn Forte said, "That's reading."
That counts. That's awesome. Yeah, I could just see Carolyn encouraging you to like actually build a boat and go sailing to Fiji or something too. It sounds like her, honestly.
My son, with my husband's help, my 2 sons, they did build the boat.
I love it. I love that. But you live in the Black Hills. Did you sail it anywhere?
Well, we were in Southern California, and if it's a concrete jungle. So we did take it to San Dimas. I don't know if that city.
Yeah, I do know that.
Okay, that area before where they held the Renaissance Fair, that's where my son launched the boat, and it didn't sink.
That's awesome.
Farley Mowat wrote a book called The Boat That Wouldn't Float. It's actually very humorous. This one actually floated.
That's awesome. What a great homeschool project. I mean, I was just kidding when I said it, but I love it that you did that. That that is awesome. That is awesome.
And
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
that is the result, as you can see from the back of my head,
Yeah.
that if you fill your home with books and, you know, they will, just like C.S. Lewis, there were books in every space, the bathroom. And there were books that were forbidden. There were books that were permitted to read. He read them all. And he didn't have, their family did not have the conflict between watching a screen or reading a book, obviously, but the books were accessible. And so that book about boat building was in our home, and it was
He just picked it up. I love it. I love it. So as we're getting ready for summer, and as people are putting away books from last year and looking ahead, I think it was a complicated year for everybody because the pandemic is over, and yet we still have a lot of things going on that are not normal, and people are just feeling unsettled. And so I think everybody's really relieved to move into this season of summer and maybe hopefully rest a bit. What are some tips that you would have for parents this summer as they're moving into like a couple months of maybe less structured time in their life, just as far as like learning to read well, think well, and write well?
Well, you know, I firmly believe if this is something foreign or new, it's okay. It's okay. But I would challenge a family to use the summer to just take a picnic blanket out and just read. Read to your family. Read at night for 20 minutes. One of the books I like for a mom, and I even recommend it as a family read aloud, it's the books by Jan Karon. Jan Karon's books are a vacation within a book. It's very light reading, and it's a fictional town, and it's just a very pleasurable reading. And
what's the title of it, Jan?
So Jan Karon's books, I have it here. I'm sorry.
If I know you guys that are watching with us, you've got to love these bookshelves going on.
I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. I have
We'll put it in the comments in the show notes. It's okay.
Yes, but I think if you can use the summer to just read, nature walk. If you're near museums, have some cultural stimulation, and just remove yourself, especially if you're new to this, the book work, and just let your children have that time to also just remove themselves from that. And I know that's for some that might be a little hard because you want to be able to come back to school and without a lull. But I think allowing the mind to have that stillness, that quiet, and kind of restarting and introducing, if this is new to you, this concept of having a reading culture and intentionally turning off the screens. I refer to the various books, The Shallows by Nicholas Carr, Glow Kids by Carderas, and this is another book. This is called Endangered Minds, and this other book, Neil Postman. And I refer to these books really because I want families to, in the summer, you can do your own research and understand for yourself how having screens competing with your family time is not helpful in terms of engendering a student that will write well. And so we have to be parental about this. And so during the summer months, I would just get, if you have Honey for a Child's Heart, that they have a great book list. And I love that they break it down by different age groups, and just highlight the titles that you think your son, or just give it to your son or daughter and let them pick the titles and take it to the library and check out those books. And if they don't want to read to them. Because the bond that everyone on the sofa together, the physical connection, that time of stillness and quiet, you'd be surprised how it brings the family together. And there's no alienation because no one is looking at their phone here and a movie there. And everyone is in the same room. And if you're thinking, well, we don't have anything to talk about sometimes, you can talk about the characters. You can talk about the story. This is the beauty of reading aloud and reading together. Jim Trelease talks about that, the Read Aloud handbook. He talks about that. And so I would spend the summer intentionally doing that and see if you can do it for 21 days. Challenge yourself. And nature walk, as I said, hiking. This is the time, right? The summer months are, there's no snow and it's a beautiful time to get out and be intentional with how you spend your leisure time. Even when you go out to eat, pay attention to where you're going out to eat. Do they have screens? Is that going to compete with time?
It's hard. It's hard to find a place to go out to eat without screens.
You're right.
I mean, it's really getting more difficult. Occasionally we'll just go get food and takeout and bring it home to eat together, because if we go eat there, we're competing with noise and and it's if you're a visual person, it's like you're compelled to look at the screen even if you don't want to. It's
and you know what, Lisa, it's not your fault or my fault per se, because honestly, Hollywood is always going to win. They're in the business of entertainment. So you cannot blame your child for turning their head away from you because there's a screen there. So this is why I said to be intentional about that. And like you said, it is harder and harder to find venues that don't have it. Then that I understand but in the summer months, in preparing to write well, moving forward, journal during the summer months. Instead of something as what did you do on your summer, that you can journal simple things like what I had for dinner, or what do I see in the mirror. And I say these as so simplistic, but they're meant to be, so that you have measure of success and momentum. And keeping a summer journal, and it could cover spectrum of nature, something you did visiting a friend, looking forward to something that you might be doing during summer, a baseball game you're going to catch. And so even if it's a sentence, and mom and dad, put the Sharpie marker away. You're not going to be a grammarian. You're not correcting anything. It's a safe space, uninhibited, so that they have a safe space to express. And that's what writing is. It's thinking on paper, expressing what you have to think. And just like E.B. White, the author of The Charlotte's Web, Trumpeter Swan, and so forth, he wrote incessantly. And the hardest thing is funneling it down and making every word matter. And so when you journal, write as much as you like. There's no editing. You have a safe space to write. And the more your mind is filled with the brilliant and beautiful ideas of the great authors, as we talked about, Dickens, Austen, and they don't have to be the 19th century authors. They can be living authors too. But as I mentioned earlier, the Judeo-Christian values have been removed. But if their minds are filled with those living ideas and those great books and replacing the screens, now that journaling and that flow will come. You will see it. And challenge yourself. Give yourself that 21 days of just replacing that activity. You're not removing, you're replacing it. And you're using the screen as a tool, like you at the True North Homeschool Academy. It's a tool. It can be an academic tool, but you're using it intentionally.
Yeah, I love that. When I was teaching creative writing, one of the things I think is really interesting is Stephen King, who's one of the current most prolific authors probably in America, who makes a fortune writing. And he was a brilliant writer. I'm not a horror kind of girl. Like, I don't like horror. I don't read it much. I live in the country. I gotta, it's just not my thing. But he's a really gifted writer. He writes 10,000 words a day, which is crazy to think about. And I think we need to tell our kids, I hear this from young kids all the time, they either don't like writing or they want to be an author. But if your kids do want to be an author, journaling is also a great way to just get them understanding the discipline of it. It's just like practicing the scales on the piano. It's a
Yes.
creative endeavor, but
Yes.
any creative endeavor that you sit down to do, you need the basics
Mhm.
and you need to understand the mechanics of it. And the mechanics of writing well are thinking well, reading well, and being able to just discipline yourself to sit down and write.
Yes.
So
I think we're all familiar with the show Seinfeld, and the writer Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld were very good friends. They were good collaborators. And one of the things someone asked, how do you write the script? How do you come up with the script? Because it's a show about nothing, right?
yeah.
That's what they're doing. And they said, we turn everything off. Nothing
Wow.
is on. Probably maybe background music, but nothing is on. We don't look at the computer. We don't look at anything. And they just write what comes to mind.
Wow.
And it's kind of like what E.B. White had in his house in Maine. He had what looked like a shed, and he just sat there and write. He was at his typewriter, and then he would leave. But he had a dedicated place for stillness and silence. And in order for us to have that stillness and silence, we need to turn off the media, turn off the screens, use it as a tool, but minimally use it.
Right.
Replacing those activities that we may, whatever we do for leisure, replacing that is conflicting with our brains to think clearly. Because in order to write well, we need to read and we need to be able to think clearly.
Yeah, I love that. Well, you are singing my song. We're going to put this in the Facebook group, and you can hear it on the podcast as well. Jan, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate your thoughts, and I would like you guys to take her challenge seriously. Do a reading challenge, do a journaling challenge this summer, and turn off the screens at least one day a week. At least one day a week. Just turn off the screens and have a screen-free day. But try to make your summer more screen-free than it might be during the school year, and just see what kind of creativity comes out of that, because I think you'll be surprised and delighted. But Jan, it has been wonderful to have you on here. You guys check the show notes for resources. You can find Jan's writing journals there, and other resources, all the books that she mentioned. And if you have any questions for Jan, you can just send them to us through DM or leave them in the comment section, and I'll get those to her. Jan, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been delightful.
If it's same here, Lisa. Thank you.